Welcome to WHU Inside Business. I'm here with Mr. Otto Schacht, who is Executive Vice President for Sea Logistics at Kühne Nagel. Mr. Schacht, thanks very much for joining us.
Professor Spinler, thank you very much for being here. Looking forward to the interview.
Mr. Schacht, can you tell us a little bit about the characteristics of sea freight? We often hear about tremendously volatile rates. There's overcapacities in the market. There's consolidation seemingly going on. What makes this market so turbulent?
Yeah, let me explain. I think I have to go a little bit back into history. Shipping was always volatile, already 150 years ago. In the beginning of shipping, we were not moving goods, but we were moving people, mostly immigrants from Europe to North America. And also in those times, in 1880, 1890, rates for moving passengers from Hamburg to New York were moving up and down. A lot of shipping lines went bankrupt, new shipping lines started, and we have seen this over the centuries. So it's a historical development. Now in the last 20, 30 years, we had a lot of container shipping lines. Each country in Europe had its own container shipping line, and we are now seeing a major consolidation because in the last couple of years, lines were losing a lot of money. Freight rates were moving up and down. There was a little overcapacity, not too much actually, but when freight rates dropped in certain trades to very low levels, that forced carriers to merge, to consolidate. We have seen rates in certain trades as low as $25 a 40-foot container, when you need to cover your costs around $2,000.
How can you hedge as Kühne Nagel against this enormous volatility in the freight rates?
We do an internal hedging indirectly. We have three major trade centers where we do all the buying and selling, coordinate the buying and selling, one in New York, one in Singapore, one in Hamburg. We negotiate on a daily basis with shipping lines freight rates. We sign long-term contracts, we sign mid-term contracts, and we sign also, we go spot in the market. And all this in a combination is a certain hedging.
One key concern about transportation is sustainability. How sustainable is sea transport if you compare it to other modes of transport?
My favorite subject, sea transportation, is actually the most sustainable sea transport, the most sustainable transport mode of all per transported unit. And give you an example, if you move yogurt, if you live in Hamburg and you eat yogurt from Bavaria, the CO carbon footprint for that yogurt is higher than if you would buy yogurt from New York, move it by ocean vessel into Hamburg and consume it in Hamburg. If the moment you, of course, start to truck it into Hanover or you start to truck it into Frankfurt, then the trucking, because trucking is so much more, has so much higher emissions than shipping per unit. So no, ocean transport, especially container, is a very sustainable product.
Okay. Now, nonetheless, there are efforts underway to replace bunker with cleaner fuel. What's the roadmap there?
There is a major change coming there because today shipping lines are burning a relatively cheap fuel and with relatively high carbon footprint emissions. And California started a couple of years ago as the first state in the US, and then Europe followed with the Baltic states and also all states around the North Sea. To reduce the carbon footprint, lines were forced to burn better fuel, which is more expensive. And now there is a regulation by the International Maritime Organization that as of 2020 on worldwide, all vessels have to burn the more expensive fuel. And then the carbon footprint will be reduced even further. And that will have effect on costs because that fuel is about 30–40% more expensive.
Air freight is certainly the most polluting mode of transportation. Do you see a shift, maybe because of sustainability or also because of cost concerns, from air freight to greater levels of sea freight?
Not yet because of the polluting effect. This will probably only come in a couple of years when governments start to get involved more on this subject. It's on cost, yes, because air freight is far more expensive. So we see a trend in certain industries. The latest industry is the pharma industry. We see a shift there from air freight to sea freight. as long as you can manage that supply chain in an efficient way. Because air freight, of course, why is air freight being used? Air freight is so much faster, and certain products where the value is very high, automatically people tend to go air freight. But there is definitely a shift. Air freight is for roughly 50% its emergency shipments. So no matter what the value is, right now we are flying a lot of milk powder into China because there is just no milk powder available, and then cost or pollution doesn't matter, people start to move it by air freight.
What's the value that your customers associate with sustainability of their transportation?
Not a lot yet. There isn't. We provide them with a lot of data. We show them. We show them that bigger vessels have a lower carbon footprint than smaller vessels. We show them what the carbon footprint overall is for their supply chain. But we are not that at the point that customers decide because supply carbon footprint is lower in a certain supply chain, and that they start to switch modes of transport. They want to know about it, but it's not a deciding factor yet.
Okay. In many industries, startups disrupt existing incumbent players. Do you foresee that also to happen in the freight forwarding business?
There's a lot of talk on this. A lot of people are talking about it, trying something. It's interesting. When the internet started in 2000, they were the first startups and tried to penetrate this industry. All these startups disappeared after 2-3 years. In 2003, they were all gone. Now we see in 2014, 15, 16 another wave. We have to see. In the intercontinental supply chain, intercontinental forwarding, it's very difficult still because the unreliability to overcome this with pure technical solutions. You still need people globally for this. In overland transportation, I could imagine that we will see trends like we see in the private transportation, like a Uber kind of thing. Their disruption might take place at a certain point. In the intercontinental air freight and sea freight, personally, I don't see this happening so fast.
Okay. Is Kühne Nagel dealing with any kind of startups in this particular business?
Yes, we do. We talk to startups, but not so much in what we do directly, because we are very technically advanced in this respect, but we look more outside of our normal areas and see, are there any totally new ideas which might come up, which we might incorporate into our strategy. So that is a trend which, we're looking at incubators. We looked at companies in Berlin, in Silicon Valley, to see, are we getting some totally new ideas? Not so much in our own field industry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very good. Thanks for
Excellent.
having me here.